So, I'm going to speak about not about how Abaza expresses the caritive meaning, but rather about morphosyntactic properties of a particular caritive construction in this language. And my data are rather preliminary. This is probably important. So, Abaza is a minority language of Russia spoken in the North Caucasus. It belongs to the Northwest Caucasian or Abkhaz-Adiga family, and forms a separate branch of this family together with Abkhaz. And here is the genealogical tree of the Abkhaz-Abaza dialects, and as you can see, Abaza is, actually belongs to the Abkhaz dialectal continuum, so to say. It is really very close to Abkhaz, although they are not spoken in a contiguous region. And I'm going to talk about one variety, of the Tapanta dialect, which is actually Abaza proper. This is the least described language of the family, and although descriptive works exist mostly in Russian, but some works in English are also available, they are all insufficient, unfortunately. And this work is part of the ongoing project on the documentation and description of this language, co-organized by a team of scholars from from 2 universities in Moscow. And this data is based on field work to the village in Zhitchukun in Karachay-Cherkess Republic in Russia. Here are some fancy pictures of the scenery and of the linguists and the native speakers. Abaza, like most Northwest Caucasian languages, actually is characterized by rich consonantism and impoverished vocalism, polysynthesis and consistent head marking, ergativity. Like Abkhaz, it doesn't have any core case marking, and by a weak distinction between parts of speech. Importantly, however, none of these, apart from the last point, are going to be of any real relevance for this talk. So very briefly about parts of speech or word classes. It is possible to characterize Abaza together with other languages of this family as omnipredicative, meaning that at least all nominal stems can take stative verbal morphology when used as predicates. This can be, I'll show it in a moment. Also of importance for this talk is that adjectives and possibly underived adverbs can be regarded as a subclass of nouns. And there is a recent, not yet published paper by Yuri Lander and Irina Bagirokova, who propose a very interesting and novel interpretation of this situation for another language of the family, which mutatis mutandis probably applies to Abaza as well. Anyway, now I'll show how omnipredicativity works. The first example contains a stative verb root to stand, furnished with a prefix expressing a participant and a suffix expressing tense, aspect, and mood. The second example has the same morphology applied to a simple nominal stem. So she is a Circassian is expressed in Abaza just in the same way as she stands. Finally, in the third example, we see the very same morphology applied to a complex nominal expression, to a noun phrase furnished with a possessive prefix. This is your main job. We take the expression your main job and furnish it with the regular participant indexing prefix and a regular tense aspect mood suffix. And this will be of some importance for the discussion of the caritive, to which I now turn. I will focus on a dedicated caritive marker, which is probably a suffix or probably two suffixes. It's not fully clear. There is a suffix da and there is a suffix da, or sometimes even da. And if you look into dictionaries, it can appear that da forms caritive adjectives. Like if you take the noun voice, bzida is voiceless, silent. While if you add to this caritive adjective a further suffix a, which is not actually frequently used outside of this formation, then the result would be an adverbial. So according to the dictionary, bzida is silently. However, even if you still look into the dictionary, it turns out that things are not as straightforward as this. And when you work with native speakers, they become still less straightforward. So even if diachronically the relation between these two elements is like shown here, synchronically it looks like messy, so to say. And in this talk, I will only discuss the suffix da, and will show that it poses certain problems. It attaches to nominals, both simple and complex, and yields forms that do not easily fit into any existing class of forms which can be discerned in Abaza. So let us see how it works. Oh, not yet. Not yet. And this fact is actually reflected in the descriptions, because those descriptions which mention this element at all treat it in very different ways. So one grammar calls it a caritive case, simply and straightforwardly. However, another description says that it is a derivational marker on nouns, while a third description says that it is a postposition. In fact, if we look at Abhaz, we'll see that this element, the cognate of the Abaza element in Abhaz, can function both as a suffix and as a genuine postposition taking cross-reference marking. So this yida in the second example is clearly and uncontroversially a postposition. However, for Abhaz, this is not the only construction it can appear in. As far as I know, for Abaza, the postpositional use is impossible and never reported anywhere, but probably it was possible in the past. So, is this suffix a case marker? Well, there are a number of facts which seem to point in this direction. First of all, this element forms adverbial modifiers, like the girl draws without a pencil. It looks like a case marker. For instance, although Abaza doesn't have core case markers, it has one or two oblique case markers, for instance, the instrumental in la, and the instrumental also forms adverbial modifiers, like she beat me with rods. So in this respect, the caritive a looks similar to the case marker. Also, if we look at forms to which the caritive can attach, we will see that it can attach, for instance, to plural forms of demonstratives and human nouns, like without them and without relatives, which suggests that it attaches not just to stems, but to inflected forms. Moreover, it clearly can take phrasal scope, for instance, and can attach to combinations of nouns with adjectives, like without a beautiful song. It can attach to nouns with possessive prefixes, without my knife. And it can take scope over demonstratives, without this knife. Finally, it can even take scope over nouns modified by relative clauses. Without that teddy bear my mother gave me, the scope of the caritive includes the relative clause. However, there is also evidence problematic for treating the caritive as a case marker. First of all, it does not attach to the regular plural suffix. There are basically two plural suffixes in Abaza, one for restricted to humans and the other more general. They can be shown to belong to different slots in the nominal word form, and while we have seen that the caritive attaches to the human plural, it cannot attach to the regular plural. In contrast to the instrumental la, which has no problems with the regular plural. Further, caritive doesn't attach to the indefiniteness suffix que. So if we want to say something like I learned French without a teacher, you can't use the indefinite suffix here, only the bare stem. Again, the instrumental la has no problems with the indefinite suffix. Further, and this is still more complex, Abaza has not only had external relative clauses, but also had internal relative clauses. And in this type of relative clauses, the last word of the relative clause is the relative verb. And the caritive cannot attach to the verb. So it cannot attach to the relative clause as a whole, so to say. In contrast to the situation which we have already seen, but when it attaches to the nominal head of the relative clause. And in contrast to the instrumental, which can be found on the verb of the relative clause, meaning that the instrumental indeed is a phrasal affix, so to say. the caritive is not a phrasal affix in this sense. Let us now consider to what extent the caritive behaves like a derivational marker. Well, it shows certain properties of a derivational marker. First of all, it can occur in the caritive forms can occur in the predicative position and attach stative verbal morphology. So you can form the the stem something like jobless, and you can use it as a predicate in the same way as one can insert a stative verb or a noun or an adjective in this construction. You cannot, at least as far as the few native speakers I could consult before this talk told me, you cannot do this with a genuine case marker, for instance, with the adverbial case marker ta. Such forms cannot occur in the predicative position. Still further, caritive forms can attach other more complex verbal morphology, like a host of verbal affixes with the spectral and evaluative meanings, as in this elicited example. And they even can serve as input to inchoative and causative derivation. So you can take this jobless and turn it into a verb meaning to become jobless, or into a transitive verb meaning to make somebody jobless. And this is, again, something you expect from a derivational formation, not from a case form. So in this respect, these forms seem to behave like property denoting lexemes or adjectives. And Abaza adjectives form compounds with the head noun, or either with adjectives occurring either to the left of the noun or to the right of it. And normally, though not obligatorily, adjectives taken over at adverbial marker when used adverbially. At least one normally says something like, in a beautiful way, beautifully, it should rather have the adverbial suffix. However, caritive forms, okay, I'll probably need to take a couple of more minutes from the discussion time. Caritive forms, at least the caritive forms with the suffix da, are disfavored or completely banned from adnominal modification construction regardless of word order. I have a suspicion, based more on the dictionary data than on work with native speakers, that with da, not with da, but with da, things are probably different, but it still has to be figured out. Anyway, the normal way of expressing meaning such a beardless guy are relative clauses with negative existential verbs. This is what native speakers give in elicitation when asked to translate things like beardless guy into Abaza. They do not give things with a caritive suffix. And besides that, caritive forms do not attach the regular plural suffix. You can't say the jobless people in this way, although you can say the beautiful people in this way. So forms with the suffix are not adjectives. So to summarize, the Abaza caritive formations with the suffix "da" show mixed and atypical behavior with some properties of oblique case markers, but not other properties of oblique case markers, and with some properties of adjectivization markers, but not with other properties of such markers. And so they seem to form a category of their own. So to conclude, the Abaza caritive doesn't fit well into the system of morphological markers, stranding the boundary between stem formation, roughly derivation, and inflection, or phrasal marking. It is problematic in terms of lexical category because caritive forms are no longer nouns. They are certainly not yet adjectives, and if they are adverbs, they are atypical adverbs. And probably these questions can be resolved by a careful synchronic and probably diachronic analysis of the relations between the "a" and "da", but again, things are rather messy, and this still remains to be figured out. And here is probably the last and pertinent example of caritive for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. What a beautiful mess of a system. So we have about 7 minutes for questions. Natasha was the first one.
Thank you for the presentation. I have rather a comment. As far as I understand, there is certain transcategorial properties of caritive markers, or what is actually negators in the Mongolic languages, for instance. So I was looking, I think there was a short paper by Alena Aksionova, I think, about this Buryat marker. So, I mean, I understand that the things are very different because in your case, this is not a negator, but still, I think for the discussion about the very vague continuum between word class properties of the elements in the caritive domain, this might be useful. So I think we have the talks on the Mongolic languages tomorrow, because there it's also tricky how the thing that is sort of a standard negator, which is also an asymmetric negator in these languages, behaves a little bit more different when it is used in the attributive domain. And yeah, so it's a really tricky thing, and also how to classify it, because for instance, when you have this in the data with the instrumental suffix, then it's very specialized for this caritive domain. This is what I had in my data, for instance, because this is the typical adjunct circumstance role, what the caritive phrases have, but then you don't really have the same form in other contexts. So it's very specific for this. So I think this is generally probably an interesting, how to say, aspect of the caritive constructions. I think.
Yes,
Thank
Natasha,
you.
thank you so much. Well, I know that morphological caritive markers even tend to be problematic in this respect.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to listening to some talks about this.
To me, it also distantly, remotely reminded Chuvash Caritive, which has some strange properties when, well, it resembles a case marker, but it also can attach derivational markers like substantivizers or verbalizers. and get lexicalized in these forms. Okay, sorry, so Aura also had a question.
Yeah, thank you. That was super interesting. I was wondering about. I'm looking at the table, the summary, the table that you have in the summary, and I'm wondering about like two things. The first one is, do the characteristics in the higher left corner and the characteristics in the higher right corner coincide? As in, do you get both of them at once? The reason I'm asking is because I have been discussing this with Maxim and with Elena. The fact that the Russian bez does not show the same behavior when it is used as a preposition and when it is used as a prefix in an adjective. So I was wondering whether you are dealing whether you might be dealing with something similar.
I thank you all. This is a very good point. Well, I think it might be the case because of course you can't take a whole caritive phrase and put it into verbal morphology. However, I simply don't have enough data, and probably some of my data is not yet fully reliable. So I'll have to check some of such things. For instance, while it is possible to take, as I have shown, it's possible to take a phrase with a possessive prefix and turn it into a predicate. So a possible question might be, is it possible to say something like this is without your hammer, whatever this could mean? Well, if you're able to come up with something more meaningful, and so this is a question. So yeah. Yes, it can be it can well be that actually there are more than one construction, and I think there are more than one construction, because there is this. It seems to be that there is this da, which is an adjectivalizer, and which is a derivational marker, and there is this da which seems to become more like a case marker. But the problem is that the system looks like being in flux. Like da seems to be lexicalized, and different speakers allow different things to do with da, and it has to be checked against much more data.
And one more comment that I wanted to make was about these derived adjectives not being able to modify nouns. Well, you surely know that there's a ton of languages where derived adjectives, or at least where adjectives do not function as attributes at all. Or if I'm not mistaken, there are some languages where adjectives derived from verbs can be predicative but cannot be attributive. I think I'm thinking of Edo in this case, where there's some discussion about whether these adjectives are adjectives or not adjectives. But anyway, the productive class only functions as predicates, and the non-productive ones only functions as attributes. So this may not necessarily be an argument against treating them as adjectives. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, the problem for Abaza is that since the distinction between adjectives and other nominals in this language is very well, very thin to begin with, probably the only meaningful way to define adjectives is to say that adjectives are those nominals which are able to modify nouns in a particular construction. So those things that look like nominals but cannot work this way are clearly not adjectives. But again,
they could be nouns then.
Well, they could be nouns, but they do not work like ordinary nouns anyway.
Right.
That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Calls for some
Fascinating.
speech.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? I think we can continue some more since it's the last talk of the day. Well, I had some actually. I had a question about, yes, so at some point you were saying that it doesn't combine with plural and with indefinite markers. But then how do you express such things? It becomes a totally different construction.
Well, that's
okay, at least for plural, we can imagine a context where it's.
So where is it? Well, I think, well, actually, the most common way to express caritive meaning in Abaza, I think, the default way is with this negative existential verb by means of a relative clause. So if you want to say something like I came to the party without my children, then the only way to say so would be I came to the party, my children not being with me, or not bringing my children with me. And since this is the productive and default way, so there is no ineffability here, so to say. It seems that this that indeed this marker, at least originally, it expressed something like a property of lacking something, like probably a pawless cat or a handleless bag or things of this kind. Well, for instance, I checked things like window caritive house, and this means a house without windows, house lacking any windows whatsoever, not something like a house which has a window, a -1 window than the average, or something of that kind. Though I haven't checked things more interesting things like a bag without one handle or the like.
Also, yes, things like single-handed person, right? Person without a hand, only one.
I don't remember this.
Yeah, I think it's just a possible thing to explore in the same vein.
Yeah, I think it's rather a person with one arm rather than person without, but I have to check it, of course.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter. I think it's time for us to close the session. Thank you.